Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone.
Hello, everyone. Happy holidays. This is Human Potential at Work, and we're recording this a couple of weeks before the end of 2020. So my guest today is James Emmett, and I've known about James' work for a long time. And I was telling him right before we went on air that I want to make sure that y'all know about his work, and you probably might know about his work, but not realize that he was involved because he's been involved in some of the biggest success stories in the United States. And I just think James is an amazing leader, and I've been neglectful not having him on the show before. So James, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thank you, Debra. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so James, tell us about your company and just tell us a little bit about your work, because I think some of the audience is going to realize they do know about your work, but tell us a little bit about it because it's pretty impressive, the success that you've had.
Well, thank you, and thanks again for having me. So I'm James Emmett. I'm the owner of James Emmett and Company. We are a family-owned company. So my brother, my wife, my two daughters with disabilities work for me, and a bunch of other great people as we grow. But I'm a corporate disability consultant by trade. So I have spent basically my whole career in disability employment, but have had the opportunity to work more on the demand side with companies over the past 15, 16 years, Debra. So some of them, we can talk more, but some of the companies that I've had the pleasure of being a part of their first time ever in disability inclusion space includes Walgreens, Pepsi, UPS, Cummins, and a variety of other companies that we've had, and also have the pleasure of having a long-term relationship with the Post's Family Foundation, which is now understood to help launch some projects along the way as well. So again, it's fun to be here. I'm excited to talk more.
And so, you mentioned that it's a family enterprise and that your daughter's with disabilities, and it's funny because Real Global Impact, it's not just family, but my son is our chief marketing officer because he loves this industry. He grew up with his sister with Down syndrome, and he went to school for this. So, but sometimes people around you are your best resources. But do you mind, tell us a little bit more about your family?
Yeah, so I am a father of five. My two oldest daughters both have intellectual disabilities, and myself, right? I was born with a physical disability, so I've grown up my whole life without a left hand. But yeah, have five great kids. All the way age range from 26 years old all the way through 9, and have been married for 25 years to a great wife who also I actually met on an internship in my rehab counseling graduates program. So it all comes back to disability employment, right? She was a job coach and a job placement counselor, and now works for me as one of my lead embedded specialists in the company.
Well, that I was going to ask you why you're in the disability field, and then you answered it. As how interesting, and the reality is, we know that there's so many families that are part of this community. So,
Yeah,
I want to tell you something, James. Tell the audience at the same time that the first time I heard about you from Walgreens. And I was trying to think if it was Deb Russell I heard it from, or Randy, or it was interesting because I was fascinated with what was happening with Walgreens, and I want you to tell the story. And for maybe the audience that doesn't remember it or hadn't heard about it, or refresh our memories. But it was a very, very powerful story. And it still is. I love the work. But at the time, I had CVS come to me, and they were asking me some questions, and they had an event that happened that I want to correlate to your work. So this was years ago. This was probably 2004, 5, 6, I can't even remember exactly when it was, but it's been a few years back. And they put out that they wanted to hire people with disabilities in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is where I live. And they immediately got over 250 people connect to them and say, I can help you hire people with disabilities in Virginia. And many of these people would be from the same agency, and they were just attacked almost with a barrage of, we can help you, we can help you. And it was very overwhelming. And I was talking, I think it must have been Deb Russell, and I was talking to her, and she said, well, that sort of happened to us at Walgreens when we first started out. And so then we found this man who was able to pull it all together, and we put him sort of as a front person, and so that he could help funnel all of the people that really wanted to help, but didn't understand how overwhelming it was for the corporation. And that man was you. And so I was hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit about how you got involved with Walgreens. And it is considered a major success story in the United States, and it continues to thrive and grow. But how did you know to do this? And I've always been fascinated with how you knew that had to be done for us to be successful, because you were.
Well, so first of all, it falls in the way I met Walgreens falls in the category of better to be lucky than good. I actually got a call. I was in graduate school in Chicago in 2004, and I got a call from a colleague at 6 a.m. on a snowy morning saying, hey, my wife is sick and I have to do this training for this group of folks from Walgreens. We're building an inclusive distribution center, and I need you to go out without any material and do a half-day long disability awareness. So
that's no problem. So you're just yeah.
Exactly right. No problem. No material, no anything. All right. So I'll just go ahead and live for 3.5 hours. But that's what we did. We pulled a few things together, and actually Randy Lewis, who many of your audience knows very well, right? Who was the brainchild behind everything at Walgreens. Really, he walked me, he was in that training, and he walked me to the elevator and said, hey, James, that was great. Would you like to come back for 2 weeks as a consultant and help us to think about our systems and the way that we're thinking about both the technical systems and the human resource systems in Anderson, South Carolina, this new distribution center that we're building? And so I did, and we did the 2 weeks. And then at the end of the 2 weeks on Friday, he walked me to the elevator and said, hey, you want to spend a couple of years with us, helping us to think about how we can hire people at scale, right? And it was the first I had ever, right? I'd been in rehab counseling, been in disability employment, and it was really the first that I had ever been approached to look at that type of scale. And it was exciting. It was scary. There was no book on it, but we built and we moved forward, and we figured out, I think, Debra, the key is figuring out a good lead partner, which we found in South Carolina with the county board. But then also figuring out a lot of other great partners that surround that, and tapping into all those partners, tapping into the wealth of resources and candidates that are in the disability community.
Yeah, very well said. And I will tell you, a lot of my audience is not in the US, and so they might not be familiar with Randy Lewis and what Walgreens have done.
Yeah.
I know that my US audience might be in some of my UK audience, but I don't know that everybody does know who Randy Lewis is and what you did at Walgreens. And so, and the thing that there was so much I loved about what was happening with your group at Walgreens. I liked that y'all were really looking at this from the perspective of how do we make sure the workforce is accessible and inclusive, and how do we make sure, okay, so we're hiring people with developmental or intellectual disabilities, like my daughter with Down syndrome, but we're also we're going to continue to have other employees that don't have disabilities. So there was a lot of universal design, accessibility, inclusive design efforts that I remember just being so thrilled about. And so I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind, maybe for the audience that doesn't know some of this as well, exploring a little bit of that.
Yeah, and so just off the top, Randy Lewis at the time was the head of distribution for Walgreens, right? The United States largest or second largest retail pharmacy. And and he oversaw all the 20 or so distribution centers and the 10,000 person workforce, right? But he also has a son with autism, and he really came with the challenge of let's challenge the way in 2004 corporate America thinks about hiring people, especially people with autism and intellectual disabilities, right? And that it's a business solution. And so we built that. And one of the things that Randy gave me the opportunity, Debra, to do was sit on the team that was building the systems that were going to go into the distribution center. So very simple example. In an old distribution center, when a package would come into the distribution center, you used to have to visually check 12 numbers on the package to 12 numbers on the screen, right? Took a while. You had to make sure the accuracy was there, because if it was the wrong, if there was a mismatch, you'd send that package to the wrong place, right? So you had to check the 12 digits to the 12 digits. We developed a system where you had to just check a pink triangle to a pink triangle, or a green square to a green square, to make it more accessible to people from a variety of different backgrounds. But the truth is then, right, what happened is it just became more productive, right? It just was easier,
Across
disability
the
or not,
board.
right? Exactly.
Right, across the board.
Yeah.
And that is a beautiful, there's so many important parts to this story. And I would contend that this changed, the way certainly Walgreens does distributions, but there were one thing Walgreens did, which I'm so grateful for, is that they then went and started teaching other companies to do it.
Yeah.
And and they just showed such leadership. And Randy wrote a really powerful book about this experience, and he now does consulting himself, and because he's retired now, and does a lot of speaking engagements. And I've always been a fan of his work, but I just thought it was so powerful. And it's also interesting to note that Walgreens and your efforts looked at what other corporations at the time were doing. I know Canon was doing a project that, they looked at and they were like, oh, that's interesting. So I liked how the corporations got together and said, okay, so how can we do this? Who should we be working with that can really help us really be successful with this? And I also applaud them. I love the work that a lot of companies are taking to include people with autism. And I know I have a nephew with autism that works for Ernst & Young. They have a wonderful program there. But I also appreciate that Walgreens looked at this even broader, and we're including people with Down syndrome, people with other intellectual disabilities. It's going to take all these different programs for us to be successful. Yes. But, we hear all the time, James, that, we can't find the talent. I know recently the CEO of Wells Fargo, probably it's been a couple of months now, made a comment about not being able to find talented African Americans and got very criticized for that. But the reality is a lot of corporations do really struggle to find talented employees that are going to be hopefully a fit, they consider a fit. So I know, once again, you have this wonderful success story with Walgreens and these other corporations, but I was just wondering if you would like to talk a little bit about that, because that continues to be a problem all over the world, and that talented people with disabilities can't seem to connect with corporations that really need them.
Yeah, it's a little bit of it's like we call it the Great Divide, right? Where we are working with more and more companies that are keen in on accessibility and inclusion, right? And want to find that talent, yet finding talent at scale is our number one challenge. But then when we talk to the disability, the supply side providers, there's still a lot of people struggling to find good work, right? A lot of talented folks with disabilities who are struggling to find good work. And I think in the next 15, 20 years, that's our challenge, to close that great divide. And for me, the way we do it is, as you've been alluding to, Debra, is doing this with companies at scale, right? We have more and more great people in our industry of disability inclusion, and more folks that are focusing on employment. But the truth is, there are 250, 300,000 companies in the United States that could use our services. And as you know, 10 times that globally, right? we've got to collaborate, right? We've got to work together. Our industry has to work together and realize and learn from each other. You said that the collaboration between companies, right? Trying to build on that. But it is, I mean, and I would say, Deborah, this is a time, in the pandemic, though, we have seen more and more companies coming to us saying we need good labor, loyal workforce. So let's talk about disability inclusion. Let's talk about the accessibility needs and the inclusion strategies to help us get there. This is a window for us to continue to grow and help people, but we have to do that on a collaborative and on a scale basis.
I agree. And unfortunately, that isn't happening in the field, in the States and all over the world. There's still, unfortunately, because, and I just want to say I want to start with why I think that we have this problem. Part of the problem is that disability inclusion has not really been a priority for companies and countries. It just hasn't. Yeah. And so now we want to be included and we're working on that. But the reality is I think a lot of people have been starving, so definitely famine. I've had that problem. I've invested so much of my own personal money in this work, but I have a daughter with Down syndrome. My husband has dementia now. I am a person with invisible disabilities. I believe in our community, and money should be spent. I don't need to have a fancy car and a boat and a fur coat. I want to make the world a better place.
Right.
And so I often see people stabbing each other in the back. It's really disheartening seeing some of the stuff that I've seen and some of the way people behaved. But I also think that's maybe the way the world was working. Now, in 2020, we're realizing more and more we are in this together. We better work together. We better collaborate. We better help each other. I also think there's a big misunderstanding of being in the disability inclusion field, because I'm in the disability inclusion field, have been for a long time. We are experts in accessibility, but there's other experts in accessibility who are even smarter than we are. And we've done, we focus on strategy and helping the brands and blah, blah, but there's a confusion. Everybody thinks I must be an employment expert. Oh, and you must be an accessibility expert. And but it's like any other field. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of nuances. There's, I work with one corporation and somebody said, oh, well, this one thing isn't accessible. Talk to Debra Rue. Well, I'm not really working on that company with accessibility. I'm helping them in other ways. Yep. But so there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion, and there are people that don't want to collaborate. And that's just the way it is in all industries. But at the same time, I think it causes a lot of confusions with the corporations, and just, because a person is in the field you have to take the time to do your due diligence as a corporation and understand who you're working with.
Right.
That's one thing I've always admired about your work, is because you actually have really done it. You have done it, and you have really made a big difference for these corporations. And so I've always admired the work that you've done, James, and that your company has done. So I was just wondering if you wanted to, address that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That.
Yeah, well, and I think you're absolutely right. I think sometimes our field of disability inclusion identifies a company that's moving in, and we all tend to kind of scoop in, and there's so much out there to be done. If we had more strategy and more kind of intent around different areas of expertise and collaborating with those, I think we would be. But let me give you a very specific example of a shout out to collaboration. So we are working with Advance Auto Parts as one of our clients, and we have had the opportunity to watch a company, both in distribution centers, their stores, their corporate office, across their business, start to think about inclusion, start to think about how we can hire people with disabilities at scale into all roles, right? And we have had great success at local levels. Places like partners like vocational rehabilitation have been great state by state, right? Just excellent. And I know Kathy West Evans runs the net, right? But shout out to her and all the organizations like Voc Rehab. We work with Easter Seals. We work with the ARC. We work with, and it's taken so many organizations, both at a local and a national level, to get this going. But our goal is to hire through this project initially, right, 700 to 1,000 people next year, and then continue to build off of that strategically and getting to people with more significant barriers to employment, right? Getting to people with more to create those opportunities. But it can't be done by James Emmett and Company alone or Advance alone. We need all the partners, and in this case, we've seen such success that Advance wants to continue to grow because of that collaboration. This can happen with every company, Debra. This can happen, and I think we just need to continue to have that strategic intent around not just, as you said, accessibility, but let's start to get to scale. We need to get numbers into corporations. We need to challenge ourselves and our corporate partners to look at their hiring numbers and to look at their internal numbers as well.
I agree. And of course, I know that I work a lot with these global brands, and they'll say, well, we're doing one thing in the US and we're doing it in the UK. And I am always saying, you need to do it in your entire geo footprint.
Yeah.
Because you send the wrong, I mean, we appreciate it. We appreciate it. We really appreciate it. But you accidentally send the wrong message if you have, if you're a global brand and you're only looking at it in the United States, for example.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of moving parts accommodating your employees with disabilities, whether or not I had a UK company come to me and they said, well, we don't understand, how do we ask them if they have a disability if we're not allowed to ask them if they have a disability? And things are very confusing there in the States. And I said, yeah, they are, but
yeah.
we don't want to discriminate against each other. And so this is just the way we do it. Well, y'all should stop suing each other. Well, once again, we're in the United States, we create laws and then we use our litigation system to pound our laws out. And I can't stop something that is so ingrained in the United States. But there is a lot of confusion. And there's also a lot of confusion. I have corporations saying, should I be focused on working only with the national organizations in our country, or should I be involved in the global conversations? And I always say, if you're a global company, you need to be in the local, the national, and the global conversations.
Right.
And you need to be, whatever you're doing successfully in the States, yay, but you need to look at how that goes out through the entire geo footprint of when you're in. So, and I agree with you, James, we're all stronger together, working together. And I'm looking forward for our industry to continue to grow and thrive. But right now, there's a lot of moving parts and it gets a little confusing,
Right.
which is why I've always, once again, really appreciated the work you've done. So let's talk a little bit more. So you started by helping Walgreens. Let's talk a little bit about how it evolved into working with other corporations. You already mentioned one, but.
Yeah. So once it was back in 2006 when I was finishing my 2-year engagement with Walgreens, it was still pretty new in terms of the scale, right, related to disability inclusion. I had the opportunity to then engage with Best Buy, and they were at that time opening their .com distribution center just south of Louisville, Kentucky. And so I spent a year helping Best Buy think about, again, their systems, their technical systems, and their human resource strategies to do the similar thing that the Walgreens distribution centers has done. And I believe the Shepherdsville Best Buy distribution center is another sparkling example of success of what can be done when you build universal design into your technical systems and your HR. From there, I went on, we met with some companies like Pepsi and UPS, helping them to build projects as well. And it's just kind of grown from there. And nowadays, Debra, we work with some, like we said, Advance Auto Parts and some other Fortune 500 brands. But what we're also seeing, what I'm really excited, Debra, is we're seeing so much rapid growth in the mid-level companies, in the companies that have somewhere between 100 to 5,000 employees. And And the flexibility and the agility of these companies to build quickly has been really fun to work with. So we still spend a lot of our time in the Fortune 500 market, but more and more we're helping companies in that mid-sized market as well.
Which is very, very exciting because not all of our states have gigantic companies.
Right.
So it's very important to be working with the SMBs, the small and medium businesses.
Yep.
But I do know this answer, but I want you to talk a little bit about this. Why is it so important for you to look at it from a systems change? As you're talking about going into the systems and the processes, and why not just, well, here you go, here are some people with disabilities, go hire them.
Yeah, as you know, right, it takes a full scale, to create a disability inclusive environment, it takes the kind of a whole component, a whole package of support, right? And we typically provide from sourcing, right, from building sustainable pipelines of candidates with disabilities to building support, right? I grew up in the vocational rehab system, and our answer to supporting people, especially with significant disabilities, was a job coach, right? And again, nothing against job coaching. There's some great job coaches, and we still use them in our projects a lot. But we want to build those natural supports, right? We want to help the expertise live in on the ground supervisor for them to make the accessible changes that need to be made, right? So supporting is a part of that. Messaging is a part of that. And Debra, one of the biggest things that we do is we measure return on investment from the second we engage with a company, right? We want to make sure that everybody understands disability inclusion isn't about charity, isn't about that nice little story over there. It's about business and building your business and making companies better operators. And that's what we pride ourselves in doing, is measuring that return with the companies that we engage with.
Yeah, so now you see why I'm such a fan of James, because you want it done right, James is your guy. So James, I'm going to ask you two more questions. I'm going to give them to you at the same time, but
Okay.
I want you to tell me what you're hopeful about in the future. But I also want to make sure that the audience knows how to find your website. I know you're on social media. I want to make sure that they know how to come to you. And I'm going to also ask you a third question. Are you only working in the United States, or do you work globally as well? So
okay.
I threw
Cool.
3 questions at you.
Cool. Yeah. No, absolutely. So I'll take those backwards, right? We are working more and more globally. We are starting to work with companies that have that global rollout. And James Emmett, it's a long wedge, right? But it's James Emmett and company.com. So it's JAMES EMMETT, and then the word and company.com. So James Emmett and company.com. And if you want to email me, just put James in front of that and we're good to go. So I'm happy to talk. We are excited. We have some great partners, and some of the partners that we work with on our business development side were former Walgreens operators that have helped us to kind of navigate through other distribution and manufacturing companies. To your last question, Debra, my hope is I was talking about this the other day. I probably have 15 years left in my career. And my hope is that in those 15 years, we see scale of disability inclusion efforts, right? Because as much as we've accomplished as a field, we're still, I think, the exception and not the rule, right, for companies.
Agree.
We've got to flip that in the next 15 years. We've got to make sure that every company has included disability in its diversity and inclusion, and not just talking, but action, right? And that starts with all the Fortune 500s, but then it goes to those, as we said, those mid-level and small level, where business case is even more dramatic in some sense for disability inclusion. And I think that to that end, we have to build more folks like us that are going to help us scale that in the field. And one of the things I'm excited with my company is being able to bring junior level folks in through and allow them to be a part of building initiatives with companies. But yeah, my ultimate hope, Debra, is we become the rule, not the exception across the globe, and that companies make disability inclusion, every company makes disability inclusion an active part of the day-to-day business.
Ooh, well said, well said. And we'll make sure that we'll put a link. And also James is on, I know you're on LinkedIn.
Yep. James Emmett 21 is my link, but I'm on LinkedIn. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's also a James Emmett band from the UK, so that it's spelled the same way. But you can find me with James Emmett, searching James Emmett Disabilities. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate it's a family affair as well. But James has had real impact. And I've always admired his work, and I wanted to make sure that y'all knew about what he was doing. He's going to also be on my other show, Access Chat, in January. We're going to talk about it there too, but I really do highly recommend James. So if you have trouble finding him, you can always come to me and I'll introduce you to him that way too. But I've always admired his work. And so sorry, talking about you in the third person, but I really have, James. So,
Debra, and right back at you. Thank you for everything you do to spread the word and all your knowledge. So it's an honor. It was an honor to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And happy holidays to you and to everybody listening. Everybody stay safe. And we're going to navigate into 2021. So thank you, James. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.